I welcome you all to AIOC 2021 79th Conference of All India Ophthalmological Society. And we have our judges with us already, live from Hall Stallard. We have Dr. Anil Sridhar, Judge and Chairperson. We have Dr. Raghuraj S. Hegde. We have Dr. Akshay Nair. We have Dr. Sanjeev Kumar Mittal, Dr. Morarpi, and Dr. Saptagirish Rambatla. I request, with your permission, if I could call the first speaker, sir.
Please.
All right. Our first speaker today is Dr. Niranjan Karthik. Do we have Dr. Niranjan with us?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Niranjan, you can unmute yourself, start your camera, and please start sharing the screen.
Sure, ma'am. I'll do that.
We'll also have a timer. If you go to the gallery view, please try and be within the time limits.
I have 4 minutes, right, ma'am?
Yes, you do.
Okay. Shall I start, ma'am?
Yes, please go ahead.
Good morning, respected judges and one and all. So we have an interesting case right here, a silent sinister swelling of the lids, a case of a sebaceous cell carcinoma in a 34-year-old. So sebaceous cell carcinoma is a highly malignant tumor, which is known to occur more commonly in the upper lid, seen usually in the 6th decade of life, and known to arise from the Meibomian glands of the tarsus. So it's a 34-year-old lady who presented with a swelling over the lateral aspect of right lower eyelid, present since 6 months. The swelling had gradually increased from the pinhead-sized lesion to the current size. There was no history of any pain, redness, swelling, watering, discharge, or decreased vision. On examination, the vision in both eyes was 6/6 and extraocular movements were full. On examination, there was a 4x4 millimeter mass present over the lateral aspect of the right lower lid, involving the tarsal conjunctiva, but not involving the lid margin or extending anteriorly. There was no loss of lashes, ulceration over the swelling, effacement of the Meibomian orifices or telangiectatic vessels over the swelling. So on imaging with the MRI orbit with contrast, there was a focal stir hyperintensity noted in the right lateral portion of the lower eyelid on the inner aspect. So as a modality of management, we went ahead with the excision of the mass with 5 mm clearance on all sides and sent the specimen for histopathological examination, which showed all margins to be free from the tumor tissue. And following that, with the lid effect being 30% of the lower lid, it was reconstructed using tensile flap. So histopathological examination revealed tightly packed bizarre basophilic cells suggestive of sebaceous cell carcinoma. So this was the preoperative picture and the postoperative photo, as you can see in a single frame. So what's so special about this case after all? While we know that the tumor of sebaceous cell carcinoma occurs more commonly among the elderly, this lady was just 34 years of age. Moreover, it's known to occur more commonly in the upper lid, while here it was noted to be involving the lower lid. And more importantly, it was not involving the lid margin or the skin, and hence could be noted only on eversion of the lower lid. And the characteristic features usually associated with the malignancy, like that of loss of lashes, ulceration, or telangiectasia, were all absent. So I would like to conclude by saying that awareness about atypical yet precarious presentation of malignant tumor like sebaceous cell carcinoma is very crucial, and timely diagnosis and appropriate mode of management can avoid grievous consequences of progression of disease and subsequent radical procedures. These were my references. Thank you.
Thank you, Niranjan.
Thank you, Dr. Niranjan. It was a short and terse presentation. Yes, Dr. Chay.
No, then that's all. I just want to know, what is the follow-up that you have in this patient?
Sir, we followed her up for 1 year, sir, at regular intervals of 3 months, and there was no recurrence of any lesion, sir.
Okay.
And why did you do an MRI, Dr. Niranjan? Because usually MRIs are not done for a lesion which is very, very visible.
Sir, we just wanted to rule out if there was any concurrent lesions elsewhere in the orbit and to know if there was any intraorbital extension, sir.
What was the TNM staging of your case?
Sir, TNM staging was I think not one. We actually didn't go ahead doing the TNM staging. So we had just taken an oncology.
What are the indications of or CT scan or MRI in case of sebaceous gland carcinoma?
Sir, we would like to first of all rule out if there's any intra-orbital extension or to actually delineate the exact extent of the mass, sir.
Okay. You think that in your case orbital extension taken?
No, sir. Actually, we picked it up at a much earlier stage. Had we left it alone, it could have definitely involved a much greater extent, sir.
Okay. What was the histopathological differentiation in your case?
Sir, the two important things which really helped us clinch the diagnosis was the bizarre arrangement of cells, sir, and they were all showing a lot of NC ratio difference, sir, as a nuclear cytoplasmic ratio, and they were highly basophilic and bizarrely arranged. This was the clinching factor in our histopath, sir.
Okay.
All right. So if all the questions are done, I'd like to move to the next speaker.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am.
Doctors, may I move to the next speaker?
Yes, please.
All right. Our next speaker today is Dr. Rituraj Barua. Do we have Dr. Rituraj? Dr. Rituraj Barua. All right. We'll come back to Dr. Rituraj. Moving on to Dr. Mavis Fonglo. Mavis Fonglo. Okay. Dr. Sri Lakshmi, do we have?
Dr. Mavis is here.
Oh,
Dr. Mavis is here.
Oh, you're here. Ma'am, would you please unmute yourself? Unmute yourself, ma'am. We
No, we can't hear you.
Ma'am, maybe you've kept your mic a little away from your mouth. Could you please get it a little closer? Ma'am, you're very slow. We can't hear you. Could you please increase the volume, if that helps?
Maybe she can try using a pair of headphones. Meanwhile, we go to the next presentation and come back later.
Yes, we can. Moving to the next presentation, we have Dr. Sri Lakshmi.
Yes, yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Doctor, please unmute. You're unmuted already. Please start your camera. You may start sharing your screen, and you will also see a timer by the side.
Yes, ma'am. Okay.
Yeah. All right. All the best.
Ma'am, are my slides visible?
Yes.
Good morning, one and all. I'll be presenting a case of orbital myositis that mimicked cellulitis on its presentation. No financial interest. Introduction: orbital myositis is a rare condition that is characterized by sudden onset of inflammation of extraocular muscles. It extends to soft tissues within the orbit. It is a subtype of orbital inflammatory disease. The principal features are periorbital pain, edema, diplopia, chemosis, and gaze paresis. Radiological features of orbital myositis overlap with those of cellulitis on its presentation, with inflammation of the ocular muscles and soft tissues of orbit being common in both the entities. Concurrent autoimmune diseases present in up to 10% of the patients, including including Crohn's disease and scleroderma. Case presentation: a 68-year-old male uncontrolled diabetic presented with painful proptosis of the right eye of 1 week duration. He underwent cataract surgery in the same eye 2 months back. Uncorrected visual acuity was 6/36 in the right eye and 6/9 in the left eye. On examination, he had marked lid edema, chemosis, and external ophthalmoplegia in the right eye. Pupillary reactions in fundus examination were normal. Patient was presumed for orbital cellulitis and was started on broad spectrum IV antibiotic elsewhere and did not show any clinical improvement. This is how the patient presented to us: proptotic eye with ophthalmoplegia. CT orbit showed fusiform enlargement of the right medial rectus with adjacent fat stranding suggestive of isolated myositis. Patient was then started on IV steroids and improved dramatically. The CT image showing the right medial rectus appears bulky, and there was fat stranding in the right retroorbital region. Discussion: orbital myositis is a diagnosis of exclusion. Differential diagnoses are orbital cellulitis, orbital abscess, thyroid ophthalmopathy, and sarcoidosis. Imaging shows unilateral, single, or multiple extraocular muscle enlargement with intraorbital fat stranding. Imaging can exclude abscess or intraorbital mass. Due to overlap in presentation, antibiotics are often started empirically. No or little response to antibiotics should raise concern for orbital myositis. Conclusion: orbital myositis should be considered in patients with acutely painful proptotic eye. Awareness of orbital myositis as a mimicker of orbital cellulitis can avert delay in diagnosis. Thank you.
Hi, Dr. Srilakshmi. That was an ultra fast presentation. You had 4 minutes, you finished in less than 2 minutes.
Yes.
That was very fast. Just a few points. How was the patient managed? Just with steroids, is it? Or what did you have to do?
So the patient is managed with IV steroids. Dexamethasone 4 mg TID was started and then was gradually tapered to oral prednisolone for a period of 6 to 8 weeks.
Okay, and then there was good complete recovery, or what was any residual muscle change or any ocular positional change?
So there was complete recovery within 3 days of starting steroids, but after 2 months he again presented with relapse.
Would it be?
But actually, there has been a major study. There's been a major study. It's called the modified Delphi approach for the diagnostic criteria of IOID. It was published way back in 2017. It was a hallmark article in which they came to a consensus as to how you can come to a diagnosis of IOID, where they classified the disease as either myositic or non-myositic.
Yes.
And they also laid down the broad principles of treatment, actually. Maybe you could just go through that. That will help you widen your approach, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, Dr. Akshay was saying something.
I was asking, could it have been just thyroid eye disease?
Sir, thyroid profile was normal in the patient, sir.
So
in this modified Delphi approach, where they've actually tried to classify, come to a consensus, it was a worldwide study on which major orbital surgeons with more than 25 years experience were enrolled, and they gave their they designed a nomogram as to how you can come to a diagnosis of IOID. And if you go through that, you'll know that how this fits into the diagnosis and how you should manage subsequently, actually.
Yes.
Yes, Dr. Mittal, you're saying something.
Oh, that's perfect. Fine. It's okay. All right. It's all right, please. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Srilakshmi. That was a really insightful presentation. Moving on to our next presenter, we have, should we go back to Dr. Mavis Foglo? Dr. Mavis? Okay. Moving on, I'd like to invite Dr. Debarati Das Gupta. Do we have Dr. Debarati?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I request you to please unmute yourself. Of course,
Yeah,
you're not
I
muted.
did.
Start You did? Yes. You may
Yes.
start sharing your screen. You will see the timer by the side.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you and all the best.
Is my screen visible?
It
Is my
is
screen?
visible, yes.
Yeah, okay. So good morning. I'll be speaking on comparison of outcome between orbital implant with scleral trap after enucleation and four-petal evisceration. Now, these two techniques are life-changing and it leads to altered appearance and loss of binocular vision, altered appearance in the form of inophthalmos, deepening of superior sulcus, and lack of ocular motility. So, substitution of orbital volume with an optimum size implant is required to have ideal postoperative outcome. Now, in evisceration, optimum size implant cannot be given. So there has been various modifications like multiple radial incision, posterior sclerotomy, scleral quadrisection, and cells. Also, to overcome complications in enucleation, there has been various modifications. Now, this study is a combined retrospective and prospective study of 30 eyes between February 2016 and 2019, and each group had 15 eyes each, where primary implant was done in 16 eyes. And the outcome measures were qualitatively done for presence and absence of pseudoptosis, sulcus deformity, fornix deepening, ocular motility, and implant exposure. And those cases where there is severe crunch in surface area like chemical injury, post-radiotherapy, and psychiatrical disorders and mutilated eye were excluded. Now, the steps for enucleation and evisceration were similar to the conventional one, except that sclerotomy was done with scleral quadrisection and donor sclera was wrapped in orbital implant. So this is the procedure for four petal, and the last one is the orbital implant wrapped in sclera. Now, both the groups are age and gender matched. There are 56% female and 44% male. There is no difference in pseudoptosis or inophthalmos or sulcus deformity between the two groups. And there is also no difference between implant size and fornix shortening between the two groups. However, there is significant difference in horizontal ocular motility between the two groups. Adduction was adequate in 12 four-petal eyes and abduction was better in 11 four-petal eyes. Yeah, the comparison between both enucleation and like evisceration is an age-old debate, but they all compared between the conventional techniques. So what did this study add? This study has compared a modified technique of enucleation with a modified technique of evisceration. And in the right hand side is the chart showing in brief the outcome between the two groups. Now, though the outcome between the two groups were not significant, but we can see the percentage of complications were higher in the scleral wrap group, and also ocular mortality was better in the four petal group. The similar study by Nakra and Fen et al. Also found the complications rate to be less in evisceration group, but they compared it with the conventional enucleation and evisceration. Also, one patient in enucleation group had to undergo revision surgery because of repeated extrusion of prosthesis. However, there are various limitations because of its retrospective nature, subjective measurement, small sample size, and short duration of follow-up. To conclude, though our study did not show significant difference between the two groups, but there are trends to suggest that four petal has resulted in better postoperative outcome and better ocular mortality. Also, there is no requirement of donor sclera, less chance of implant exposure, and this can be used in cases of a grossly shrunken scleral shell. Thank you.
Thank you, Debrati. How did you all measure ocular motility?
Sir, this was
Post-surgery?
done by Kestenbaum ocular motility test, like where we have checked with a transparent ruler in primary position and then in abduction and adduction, and then it was compared between the two groups. And sir, it was graded as adequate. We have seen range of movement between 0 to 3 millimeter in adduction group, and accordingly it was graded as adequate when it was more than 1.5 millimeter for adduction, and range of movement for abduction was around 1 to 4 millimeter, and accordingly it was graded as adequate if it was more than 2 millimeter for abduction, and then we have graded into two categories, adequate and inadequate.
Dr. Devrati.
Dr. Debart, Is it a part of your thesis? Is it? Was this your thesis?
No, sir. No, sir.
Okay, fine.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr.
Dr. Sanjeev was saying something actually.
Dr. Devrati,
Yes, sir.
what is the reason of rest? There is a difference in the movement in both the techniques. How do you explain
sir.
it?
Sir, in the like the four petal group, the muscles are still attached to the scleral shell, whereas in the scleral wrap group, though we have introduced an artificial sclera, the muscles are still disinserted. So the motility was less in the later group.
Correct.
So the main difference lies in that, Dr. Devarti, is that technically speaking, enucleation is an orbital surgery.
Yes,
and
sir.
devisceration is actually an ocular surgery.
Yes, sir.
So that's where the difference in motility lies, because the muscles are not much disturbed vis-a-vis
Yes,
enucleation.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Devrati. Moving on, I'd like to call our next speaker. If we have Dr. Raka Chatterjee. Dr. Raka Chatterjee. Do we have you, sir? Okay. Dr. Rituraj
Raka
Barwa.
is there in the list of attendees in the session.
Okay, I'll just check.
Yeah, there she is.
She's right there. Ma'am, you can unmute yourself and please start sharing your screen. All right. All the best.
Good morning, everybody. I shall be talking on the retrospective study of management of sebaceous gland carcinomas of the eyelid. The sebaceous gland carcinomas are most common eyelid malignancies, and they arise from the meibomian glands, glands of Jay's, glands associated with the caruncle, and the most common site being the upper eyelid. The differential presentations are solitary eyelid nodule, diffuse eyelid thickening with loss of lashes, blepharoconjunctivitis, and rarely pedunculated or ulcerated. And the investigations we do are incision or excision biopsy, conjunctival map biopsy, and subsequently the tissue diagnosis by histopathology, immunohistochemistry, lymph node assessment, imaging by CT MRI. Now, different surgical treatment options for sebaceous gland carcinoma are primary surgical excision with frozen section or permanent section, exenteration for unresectable orbital diseases with or without metastasis, different adjuvant therapies and neoadjuvant therapies, targeted therapy against epidermal growth factor receptors with monoclonal antibodies, and management of metastasis. The study purpose was to study the clinical features of eyelid sebaceous gland carcinoma, to evaluate the type of treatment and its outcome, and to evaluate the prognosis after the treatment. It was a retrospective study. Patients with histologically proven diagnosis of eyelid sebaceous gland carcinoma without any prior intervention were included. There was no clinical evidence of distant metastasis in any of the patients. We had taken the help of our MRD, and we had selected 20 eyes of 20 patients and a follow-up period of 5 years from 2015 to 2020, having a male-female ratio of 16:4 and age group ranging from 50 to 70 years. And in 15 cases, upper lid was involved, and the 5 cases, the lower lid. And only eyelid involvement was in 17 cases, and there were orbital spread in 3 cases with lymph node involvement, local lymph node involvement in 1 without any involvement in. Did the metastatic workup, and the treatments driven preoperative chemotherapy, neoadjuvant therapy, excision of the lid tumor was done in under frozen section with lid reconstruction. We did orbital exenteration. And the case where in one case the preoperative chemotherapy, there we could manage to do lid tumor excision under frozen section, as after the chemotherapy the tumor size was decreased and we did reconstruct it. It was followed by ipsilateral lymph node dissection with adjuvant neck radiotherapy. Now the results were the preoperative chemotherapy given in 4 patients, 1 with diffuse eyelid involvement and 3 with orbital involvement. There was no recurrence in 2 patients, and exenteration had to be done in 2 patients. The 1 patient having orbital eyelid ipsilateral lymph gland involvement was free of tumor in orbit after the chemotherapy, and the size of the lid tumor was decreased considerably to manage it surgically. And this case was ultimately managed with the excision of the lead tumor and with margin clearance under frozen section, and lead reconstruction was done, followed by radical lymph node dissection and chemotherapy. In the 1 year follow-up, patient had no recurrence. Rest of the cases were managed surgically only. This was the diffuse eyelid involvement, and it was the result after the chemotherapy. And this was a primary management master's cheek rotation flap. And there's a Cutler beard flap. This is the post-exenteration. And to conclude, this is a retrospective study performed in a tertiary care center dealing with a relatively uncommon ocular pathology. Most cases showed good prognosis with primary surgical excision and lead reconstruction. And tumor with orbital spread or pagetoid spread were treated with chemotherapy. 25% of these eye needed no further intervention, but 50% needed exenteration. Thank you very much.
Dr. Raka, you said 25% needed no further intervention. So basically the ones with pagetoid spread responded completely to
Yes.
neoadjuvant chemotherapy?
Yes, I meant that one, that case only. Because it's a very small sample study, I cannot tell much about it, but that was the only case of pagetoid spread which resolved completely.
And did not need any surgery post-op?
No,
post-chemo.
no, post-chemo.
What chemo regime you have given to your patients?
I had sent the patient to oncologist and he gave cisplatin 5-fluorouracil 4-cycle completely.
4-cycle. And how you evaluated the response of chemotherapy in your cases?
Sir, I evaluated the patient clinically, and also every time I had done a metastatic workup, and the PET scan was very important part, because you must be remembering the case where the single local lymph node was involved. That case also we had not gone for any sentinel node biopsy. The PET scan was enough to guide us regarding the condition of the disease.
What was the toxicity you observed in after chemotherapy or during chemotherapy cycle?
Sir, toxicity, the patients were aged patient. So there was impaired liver function test. Patient that was managed by the oncologist.
Test or some other function test you want to do before chemotherapy and every cycle?
Renal function test, liver function test, and complete blood count. Complete blood count.
The general toxicity always you can see in your patient, like loss of hair, alopecia, as well as mucositis. These are the common complications. Okay, how you reconstructed the patient?
Sir, the tumor size in 17 cases.
What was the different technique? I mean, what are the different techniques you adopted in your cases?
Yes, depending on the tumor size and taking a 5 millimeter healthy margin clearance. So depending on the tissue loss, some cases were managed by direct closure. Some cases, one case was managed by master's cheek rotation flap, and one case I had to go for Cutler beard because of too much of extensive lesion. And as I already told, 2 cases I had to do exenteration. This is very much destructive procedure.
All right. Do we have any more questions? I guess not. Thank you so much, Dr. Raka. Moving on, I'd like to call Dr. Jyotsna Sharma. Do we have Jyotsna with us?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Please unmute you. Yes, we can see you. Start sharing your screen.
Is it visible?
Yes, it is. It is.
Good morning, everyone. My topic for today's presentation is Centurion syndrome, presentation and treatment outcome. Centurion syndrome is a disorder seen in young population characterized by abnormal anterior insertion of medial canthal tendon, prominent nasal bridge, and malposition of medial part of floor lid away from globe, which causes displacement of lacrimal punctum out of lacus lacrimalis, resulting in epiphora. It was first described by Sullivan et al. In 1993 as a case series of patients presenting with unexplained epiphora. They made the diagnosis of Centurion syndrome after ruling out other known causes of epiphora, and they used the term Centurion for this disorder, citing similarity of nasal structure between patients and Roman centurions.
This syndrome, however, often goes undetected, but it's important to recognize these cases and treat them accordingly, as effective treatment options are available to manage the symptom. For my study, medical records of patients diagnosed and treated as Centurion syndrome in our hospital from July 2019 to December 2019 were reviewed, and follow-up for a period of 6 months was done. We found a total of 6 such cases. All of them were male, aged between 15 to 35 years, and they complained of unilateral epiphora, which was grade 4 on Monk scale, commencing in 2nd decade of life. Other known causes of epiphora were ruled out by asking for symptoms such as history of mucoid or purulent discharge, pain over lacrimal sac area, any history of trauma to lid, fall of foreign body, or any recent eye surgery, which were absent in all the cases. No signs of conjunctivitis, keratitis, anterior uveitis, acute congestive glaucoma, or scleritis or episcleritis was seen on examination. These were the positive findings which were seen. On slit lamp examination, we could see there was loss of lid globe apposition of medial part of lower lid, and there was anterior displacement of lower punctum out of lacus lacrimalis, which is seen in all the cases. Prominent nasal bridge was seen in 5 out of 6 cases. Beak sign, which refers to inferiorly angulated medial canthus with angle pointing in downward direction, was noted in 4 of them, and deep set eyes was seen in 1 case. This is a picture of a patient with Centurion syndrome showing loss of lid globe apposition of medial part of lid denoted by black arrow, and the beak sign denoted by blue arrow. Then following tests were performed, and all the patients, they had best corrected visual acuity as a 6/6. Tear film height was raised in all of them. Fluorescent dyed disappearance test was delayed in all 6 cases. Syringing or lacrimal passage irrigation showed clear passage of fluid into nose with no regurgitation in all of them. Roplas was negative. Primary Jones dye test was negative in all, and Hertel's exophthalmometry reading was normal in 5 cases, and it showed enophthalmos in 1 case. Rest anterior and posterior segment examinations were within normal limits. For treatment, we aim at restoring lid globe apposition so that the punctum falls back to come in line with lacus lacrimalis. For that, insertion of anterior limb of medial canthal tendon via vertical skin incision was done, and suturing of tendon stump posteriorly to the periosteum of lacrimal fossa at anterior lacrimal crest was done. Post-op lid globe apposition with alignment of inferior punctum along lacus lacrimalis was achieved in 5 out of 6 cases. At 6-month post-op follow-up, epiphora was significantly relieved to Monk scale 1 in 5 patients. No relief was seen in 1 patient. FDTT showed dye disappearance in less than 2 minutes, and primary Jones was positive in all except 1 patient. So various ocular abnormalities may lead to watering, including hyperlacrimation, eyelid abnormalities, lacrimal outflow obstruction, and Centurion syndrome is a cause of epiphora which often goes undetected. To diagnose it, all causes of epiphora must be ruled out first, and treatment options for this include anterior disinsertion of medial canthal tendon with or without its posterior plication, along with plication of medial lower lid retractors in case of coexisting enophthalmos. Conjunctivoplasty can be done as an adjunct. To conclude, Centurion syndrome is a rare disorder having favorable surgical outcomes, so should be kept in mind for differential diagnosis of unnecessary epiphora, as patients can benefit from the treatment. These are thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jyotsna. Do we have any questions, sir?
Dr. Jyotsna, how did you measure the tear film height?
So by instilling fluorescent drop, 1% fluorescent drop, and by examining at the slit lamp.
What was the quantitative measurement?
Sir, around, it was more than 0.5 mm, sir.
No. My question is, how did you quantify it?
Sir, that was done by measuring with a ruler.
Ruler or the slit lamp?
Yes,
Okay,
in slit lamp, the height of the slit was adjusted, and then it was found out.
Okay, thank you.
All right, moving on. Next, I'd like to call Dr. Amber Dubey.
Hello, yeah, am I audible?
Yes, you are. You can start sharing your screen and go ahead with your presentation.
Is my slide visible? Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Ambar Dubey. I'm a second-year postgraduate resident at Shankar Nethralaya, Chennai, and today I'm going to present a case report on linear nevus syndrome. Linear nevus syndrome, also called as epidermal nevus syndrome or Jadrosar's sebaceous nevus syndrome, is a rare genetic disorder. Nevus sebaceous shows an incidence rate of 1 in 1,000 live birth, presenting isolated or as part of a syndrome. It shows no gender predilection, and it can present with an array of ocular, CNS, skeletal, urogenital, and cardiovascular abnormalities. This is a case report of a 10-year-old boy who presented to our OPD. He was a known case of seizure disorder. He had a normal birth history and uneventful pre- and postnatal period. His developmental milestones were up to date. On examination, we noted a nevus sebaceous on the right side of the face, along with alopecia areata patches over the right parietal region, an upper lid coloboma with neurofibroma-like mass, along with cryptophthalmos was noted in the right eye, and a small pink, mobile, non-tender swelling was noted over the upper bulbar conjunctiva in the left eye. His best corrected visual acuity was 6/18, and he presented with a gaze-evoked nystagmus. On fundus examination revealed a subtle peripapillary cartilage causing yellowish-orange discoloration, which was confirmed on ultrasound, B scan, and A scan as hyperreflective echoes. An MRI was done, which revealed sphenoid dysplasia and posterior coloboma of the right lobe, thickened third, fourth, sixth, mandibular division of the fifth cranial nerve, a lipocorystoma of the right CP angle, a small pineal mass was noted, along with hypoplastic internal carotid artery and hemiatrophy of the brain. A right upper lid reconstruction was done and debulking of the lesion, and the specimen was sent for histopathological examination. Histopathology and immunohistochemistry were consistent with a neurofibroma. The patient was postoperatively rehabilitated with a prosthetic shell, and he was doing well post-op. So epidermal nevus syndrome or linear nevus syndrome was first described by Jadrosar in 1895. It is sporadic in occurrence and shows a non-Mendelian transmission. As discussed, it can present with an array of ocular, CNS, skeletal, urogenital, and cardiovascular abnormalities. It can be associated with epileptic syndromes like infantile spasms and Lennox-Gastaut syndrome. Brain imaging is an utmost part of the management of this disease. Varied ophthalmic and systemic features that can be associated with this syndrome are strabismus, coloboma, cataracts, corneal vascularization, early onset epilepsy and mental retardation, brain dysgenesis, cortical dysplasias, and tumors such as ocular hemangiomas, glial hamartomas, and gliomas. So the take-home message is ophthalmic choristomas are common. Anophthalmos with neurofibroma has been seldom reported in literature. A thorough systemic workup is essential for the management of these cases. Timely intervention is of utmost importance for better cosmetic and visual rehabilitation. Thank you.
Which immunohistochemistry stain you have used?
Yes, thank you for your question. Sir, S100 was used. It is strongly positive for neurofibroma cases.
What other manifestations of neurofibroma in orbit and eye?
Sir, it can present with schwannomas, schwannomas, gliomas.
What was your differential diagnosis?
Sir, my differential diagnosis were other forms of organoid nevus syndrome like keratinocytic epidermal nevus, phakomatosis. It could have been, they were nevus, otherwise skin tag can be associated with similar oculocerebral cutaneous features, can be associated with Delman syndromes.
And what about the anterior segment examination?
Sir, anterior segment examination, right eye had a cryptol, left eye had a faint nebular corneal opacity on slit lamp examination. Other rest of the features were within normal limits. Sir.
What you expect?
Sir, we can expect cataracts in these cases, corneal neovascularization in these cases, plus strabismus, sir. Strabismus examination, we can expect strabismus. Yes. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Moving on, we have Dr. Divya J. Dr. Divya?
Yes, ma'am.
If you could unmute yourself, switch your camera on and start sharing your screen. Dr. Divya, can you hear
Yes,
me?
ma'am.
Okay.
Just a minute, ma'am. You can see my screen, ma'am.
Yes, yes. I can't see your screen. I can see you.
You can see my screen, ma'am.
Yes, I can. Go ahead.
Good morning to one and all. I'm here to present external DCR in failed cases of endonasal DCR. DCR is done to divert the lacrimal drainage into nose through ostium at the level of lacrimal bone. This can be done either through external or endonasal approach. There are many advantages and disadvantages of both the procedures, whereas external shows a more success rate. My aim is to study the outcome of external DCR in failed cases of endonasal DCR. Our study was a prospective interventional case study done on 32 patients for a period of 1 year. Data was collected, compiled in Excel sheet and analyzed using SPSS 22. Patients attending our OPD with prior failed endonasal DCR and who were symptomatic were included, whereas patients with bleeding disorders, uncontrolled hypertension and diabetes, and immunocompromised patients were excluded from the study. After informed consent, history was taken and examination was done. Roplas test and syringing was performed. Probe test was done for Roplas negative patients. Conventional external DCR procedure was performed. Silicone tubes were inserted in cases of common canalicular block. Post-op care was given and follow-up was done. Our results showed that out of 32 cases, 26 of them showed positive Roplas, whereas 6 of them showed negative. The 6 were subjected to probe tests, who showed 3 of them showed soft stop and 3 showed hard stop. The 29 cases who had NLD block were subjected to conventional external DCR, whereas the 3 patients who showed common canalicular block were conventional DCR was performed along with the silicone tube intubation. Follow-up was done at the end of 24 hours, 6 weeks, and 6 months. The non-intubated patients, 23 people showed patency, whereas in intubated patients, 2 out of 3 cases showed patency. The overall success rate at the end of 6 months was 78%. Endonasal DCR has some advantages over external DCR, but the success rate the success rate of the operation has not reached the level of the external method. Osteotomy closure by granulation tissue is the most common reason for failure in endoscopic surgery. Mean age of the subjects was 38 years plus or minus 5.6 standard deviation. Females to male ratio was 2:1. Most patients presented with chronic dacrocystitis in left eye. In our study, success rate of DCR was defined by the anatomical and functional patency of nasolacrimal system at 6 months of surgery. The success rate was 66.6% in whom silicone tubes were placed. At the end of 6 months, 25 cases had patent lacrimal drainage, both anatomically and functionally. 7 cases were termed as failure, out of which 5 were due to anatomical blockage and 1 due to functional blockage. The overall success rate was 89.6 at the end of 1 week, 82.7% at 6 weeks, and it came down to 78% at the end of 6 months. This correlated with Akke et al. Study. The most common cause of failure which we found was inappropriate size of ostium. The limitation of the study is that it wasn't done in a very large population. My conclusion is external DCR can be attempted as a revision surgery for failed cases of endonasal DCR with success rate of 78.13%. These are my references. Thank you.
Dr. Divya. Dr.
Yes,
Divya, did you take up in your study? Did you take up all the cases of endoscopic DCR performed in your hospital setup or from other places?
Even other places, sir. We have
number two, second question, like your cases all they were endoscopic DCR done only once or revision
only
has
once,
been done
sir.
earlier?
Only once.
Only once.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you said like the cause was found to be NLD blockade in most of the cases.
Yes, sir.
But while actually when in the endoscopic DCR, the flap is, this is all made at the level, the NLD, like the drainage is not through the NLD that time.
The drainage was through NLD, sir, but lot of fibrosis and granulation tissue was found, sir, when we tried to operate the failed cases.
So in your all endoscopic DCR patients which you received, did you get a prior test checkup by your ENT people and
Yes,
their
sir,
reports like where?
Yes, sir. We like most of them were referred from ENT department itself. So we did take an ENT evaluation, sir, before proceeding for the surgery.
So what is the site of actually incision in cases of endoscopic DCR then?
Site of the endoscopic endonasal DCR, sir.
Endonasal, sorry, yes, endonasal DCR.
It was in the middle meatus, sir. I'm not sure, sir.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking you. Like when the opening is actually through that area. So you said the nasolacrimal duct was blocked.
Yes, sir.
So how do you correlate in your study? Like it's basically a blockage carrying at the site of endoscopic site.
Sir,
that's fine.
Sir, when we opened up, we found a lot of granulation tissue, so we suspected it to be nasolacrimal duct blockage, sir.
Okay, that's fine.
All right. Thank you so much. I'd like to go back to our first speaker. I think he's joined us. I'd like to call Dr. Niranjan Karthik. Dr. Niranjan Karthik, we can.
I think he already finished his presentation, right?
He did. He didn't.
The second, we're looking at the second person.
The Rituraj, Dr. Rituraj Barua.
We should be calling for Dr. Rituraj Barua.
No. Dr. Mavis is there, but she's not responding.
Am I audible, ma'am, now?
Yes, you are audible now.
Yes, you're audible.
Would you please switch your camera on and start sharing your screen?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, we can see you, ma'am. We could see you.
Ma'am, can you see my slide?
No, we can't even see you. If you could please switch your camera back again. Yeah, we can see you. Ma'am, we can see you.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you need some help from the AV team for sharing
Yes, ma'am. I cannot get my sharing my slide.
I request Arya to please come in.
Yes. Hello. Hello.
Yes, ma'am. Hello. Yeah.
Hello. Yes, ma'am. Are you sharing with your phone or tab?
Yes, actually, my laptop speaker got some problem now, so I am sharing with my phone.
So what you have to do? Just click on share screen. Maximize your zoom.
I have done that.
Yeah, maximize your zoom. Click on share screen.
Yes, ma'am. I did. Yes, sir.
Okay. Then select your screen and then share it.
Do we have Dr. Harshit Shah with us? We don't, right?
Now can you see?
No, ma'am.
No.
You have to select your screen, then share it, ma'am. Yes, it's coming. No, it's gone. I think, ma'am, your bandwidth is also low. That's why it's happening.
Ma'am, is there a possibility for you to sign in with your laptop? All right. No other speaker is present with us apart from Dr. Mavis.
Dr. Harshit and Dr. Ruturaj are not there.
Yeah, they're not. They're
Don't
not.
see their names here.
They're not there. I tried calling them too. So we'll have to wait for her to kind of fix this issue. Dr. Fonglo, any progress? All right. If you have any questions from previous speakers, would you all like to take it up right now since we have time and Dr. Mavis is taking time? Judges?
No, I don't think we have any questions from
Well,
our
there's
side.
nothing because, oh yeah.
All right. What's the update?
We just asked for actually, yes.
We'll just, sorry, sir, I couldn't hear you. Arya, have you been able to help Dr. Fonglo?
No, ma'am.
No?
No.
So, judges, I guess this is it unless, what is she saying? How long will she take? Or are you unable to contact her completely?
I guess her presentation will not be marked because she's a non-ratified member.
All right, so this is it then, gentlemen. Unless we have any new speaker that has joined in.
Hi, good morning. I'm Dr. Fairouz here from Scientific Committee. Hi to all the judges. Arya, do you want to just quickly call the participant and just confirm?
I have called them, ma'am. They're not answering.
They're not? Okay. All right. So judges, do you want to take a decision whether you want to wait or go ahead?
Even I tried calling up Rituraj. He didn't answer my call.
Acha. So, respected judges, you can take a call whether you want to end the session.
Yeah, I think Dr. Rituraj and Harshit joined in the beginning itself, rather than keeping everybody waiting.
All right.
Yes, ma'am.
I think both of them are not there, Dr. Rituraj and Dr. Harshit, and they actually remarkable for the presentation. And since they're not even come this morning and they're not responded, I think we can't just wait for them. Time is there, but still others' time also.
Okay.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Zubi,
Thank you. Yes. Thank you so much. We'll now move on to the next session.
Thank you.
If your judges, if you've already marked, and judges and chairperson, thank you so much for taking out valuable time from your schedule and being a part of this. You may leave the meeting. Thank you all.